Commerce Alive Today presents
Gottschalks. The chain was founded in 1904 by Emil Gottschalk in Fresno, California. Over half a century passed before the company opened its first branch store in 1961. It was around this time that grandnephew Irving Levy, whose father had helped found the company. In an effort to win over teenage baby boomers, Gottschalks launched Bobby West, a chain of junior apparel stores, in the late 1960s. Village East shops, which offered large-sized women's clothing, were launched in 1970. Irving Levy served as president until his death in 1980 at age 86, guiding Gottschalks' growth into a chain of 6 department stores and over a dozen specialty boutiques with over $80 million in annual sales. That's when Gerald Bloom, whose father was a longtime partner of Irving Levy, assumed the presidency for about 2 years. Bloom advanced to vice chairman and consultant in 1982, making way for Levy's son, Joseph, to claim his birthright. Following the lead of other independent, family-owned department store chains like Dayton, Ohio's Elder Beerman Stores Corporation, Gottschalks formulated a successful strategy for profitable growth in the highly competitive retail industry. The core of the plan was Gottschalks' concentration on smaller markets in California's Central Valley, markets dubbed the Other California by company executives. Gottschalks avoided ruthlessly competitive cities like Los Angeles and San Francisco, which were dominated by national department store chains. It opted instead for overlooked towns with populations of 20,000 to 60,000 people too small to support larger, traditional-sized department stores and targeted middle-income households. This tactic kept Gottschalks' overhead low by allowing it to build smaller, single-level stores with lower real estate costs and cheaper labor. More often than not, it also made Gottschalks the only game in town, with virtually no competition from other department stores. As one of the state's only major retailers willing to locate in smaller cities and towns, the chain was sought out by developers and often able to demand ideal anchor locations in the new medium-sized malls and shopping centers that sprang up throughout the 1970s and 1980s. Moreover, unlike many of its small-town competitors in the retail segment, Gottschalks was often an area's only source of nationally branded soft goods. In the early 1990s, brand-name products generated about 80% of total sales, with the remainder being private label or non-branded goods. Prominent brand names included Liz Claiborne, Calvin Klein, Levi Strauss, and Sony. High-end cosmetics from Estée Lauder, Clinique, and Lancôme were particularly profitable, ranking as the company's largest-selling product group. Gottschalks' strong customer service quotient has been compared to that of Seattle's Nordstrom. By concentrating on California's inland markets, Gottschalks avoided the dramatic ups and downs endemic to West Coast cities. Although the chain was relatively small, it was not technologically backwards. In fact, Gottschalks executives often found themselves at the front of the pack in the race to install the most modern equipment. Chain store age executive Susan Warner attributed the chain's progressivism to its private status, writing that there's no doubt that as an independently held company, Gottschalks enjoys certain freedoms to experiment with more entrepreneurial concepts that often elude publicly held companies that must constantly justify actions to shareholders. Gottschalks was Fresno's premier retailer to install an air conditioner, and was among the first retailers in the area to accept bank credit cards. According to a 1977 chain store age executive article, in 1976 Gottschalks became America's first department store to totally automate sales transactions. The company installed electronic point-of-sale wands that read barcodes and store credit cards. This technology helped increase efficiency, reduce errors, and keep inventory and customer billing up to date. A 1991 profile in Barron's magazine noted that Gottschalks' computer information system was capable of hourly monitoring of sales and inventory, giving Gottschalks one of the industry's highest turnover rates. Joe Levy boasted in a 1988 WWD article that, with our computer system we can plunk a new store on the moon if we want. Gottschalks went public in 1986, selling about 50% of its equity on the New York Stock Exchange. The proceeds were used to step up the pace of new store acquisition and construction, helping to make Gottschalks California's fastest-growing department store chain in the late 1980s. The number of Gottschalks units doubled from 9 in 1985 to 18 in 1988, and annual revenues increased from $112 million to $196 million in the process. Part of this growth came via the acquisition of 2 small family-run department store chains in 1987 and 1988. totaling $11 million. The purchases of the privately held Malcolm Brock and Samuel Leask & Sons chains added 5 stores. The chain also refined its specialty store offerings, converting its Bobby West Jr. stores into Petite West boutiques mid-decade in order to attract smaller-sized Asian and Latin women. This period did not conclude without problems, however. In 1988, Gottschalks decided to close its only money-losing location, ironically the flagship store in downtown Fresno. That October, a devastating earthquake caused irreparable damage to a Santa Cruz store, forcing its closure as well. Notwithstanding these hurdles, Gottschalks fared much better than other companies in the late 1980s, according to Edward Johnson of Johnson Red Book Service. Buoyed by almost a decade of successful expansion, in 1990 Joe Levy predicted that Gottschalks would add at least 20 new markets and reach $1 billion in annual sales by 1997. While sticking to its essential strategy, Gottschalks made its first foray outside its home state in 1992, when it opened stores in Washington and Oregon. The company entered the Nevada market in 1995. But like many of its retail industry rivals, Gottschalks succumbed to internal and external pressures in the early 1990s. A 1992 investigation by the Internal Revenue Service charged that Chief Financial Officer Robert E. Lawson and Controller Jack Farnacy had falsified financial records in order to evade federal taxes in the mid-1980s. The company fired the 2 executives and paid a $1.5 million settlement to the IRS in July 1992. Gottschalks found itself back in court in 1994, when it settled 2 shareholder lawsuits for a total of $3.5 million. These issues only exacerbated competitive and economic difficulties that put the squeeze on Gottschalks' earnings in the early 1990s. In a 1994 interview with Daily News Record's Alexandra Nelson, CEO Joe Levy cited drought, base closures, cutbacks in aerospace and electronics, and the government cutting back pensions as fundamental causes of his company's malaise. Although Gottschalks' sales increased from $287 million in 1990 to over $400 million in 1995, it had a cumulative net loss over those 6 fiscal years of $4.9 million. Gottschalks planned to employ 4 basic strategies in an effort to revisit the glory days of the 1980s. The company sought improvements in year-over-year store performance, focusing especially on 2 underperforming stores. Gottschalks also hoped to lessen its overhead through layoffs at administrative levels, outsourcing, contract renegotiations, and paring of some optional expenses. The company planned to increase income by upping finance and service charges on its store credit card and to enhance cash flow by curtailing capital outlays. They also went online that same year. In 1996, they opened a 125,000 square foot store in the troubled Park Lane Center in Reno, Nevada, which had lost its 2 department store anchors Sears and Weinstocks to a larger competitor mall. The company grew in Southern California with the 1998 acquisition of Harris Department Stores, which operated as Harris-Gottschalks stores by then. In 2000, the Seattle-based department store Lamont's was acquired. Most of the Lamont's locations that were acquired by Gottschalks eventually closed due to poor sales. The exception was the Alaska market, where sales were strong and only 1 store, Wasilla, was closed prior to the company's shutdown. Closures included the locations at the Northgate Mall in Seattle, Washington, in September 2006, and in Tacoma Highlands on September 22, 2007, a freestanding location unlike the typical mall setting. The Northgate Mall location marked the closing of the last Gottschalks in Seattle. In Washington state, the remaining Gottschalks locations had succeeded in rural and suburban areas with less competition from other department stores. On October 24, 2008, Gottschalks was delisted from the New York Stock Exchange. NYSE officials stated that the value of the stock was too low to continue to be listed, and that its average global market capitalization had remained below $25 million for 30 straight trading days. Company officials claimed to be negotiating a deal for a loan with a Chinese company, Everbright Development Overseas Limited. They also stated that they would appeal the delisting decision. On December 18, 2008, Gottschalks officials announced that Everbright had pulled out of the deal. On January 14, 2009, Gottschalks filed for Chapter 11 bankruptcy. In March 2009, Gottschalks announced it lined up a group of bidders that would liquidate the chain if no other bidder was found by March 30. On March 31, Gottschalks announced it would liquidate its remaining stores. The final stores closed July 12, 2009. Several prime locations became Macy's or Forever 21. There were plans by former CEO Joe Levy to reopen some of the stores by early 2011, but those plans ultimately fell through.
It happens only once a year. Extra savings during Big G Days at Gottschalks.
Save 30% on two-piece soft dressing from Corette for Mrs. Empatisse. For the casual man, shaver-like shirts and pants, 25 to 30% off. Assorted comforter set, any size, $49.99. And in Emil's Market, this bonus 13-piece cutlery set with purchase of the select 10-piece cookware set by Cook's Bazaar at just $89.99.
Once a year savings now during Gottschalks Big G Days.
If you have any fond memories, please indicate it at the comments below. Thanks for watching, subscribe, and like.